Hello.
So now, Graham, we touched last week, maybe the week before, maybe last week, on the last dinner party, and we were doing this in
Mm,
relation actually to a different band. We brought it up when we were discussing English Teacher, Leeds band, who we um, talked about because they'd played at the
mm.
Crescent in York, and we wondered about whether maybe that they'd be just kind of blown away by the coverage for the last dinner party. But that what goes with that pressure on the last dinner party is, can they deliver? This is already winning one of the Brit Awards, the one for basically introducing one even before it's happened. Basically, new album, debut album, came out on Friday of this last week. Can't remember its title, and maybe you can tell me that. But I do think you've interestingly
Oh,
asked the
yes.
question here: how unfairly maligned the last dinner party are? This debut album that's just come out, and you make the point, and I think this is a really good call from the tracks that I've heard by playing on Spotify. 1970s Queen and ABBA with 21st century attitudes. I think that's a really good summary of the album, Graham. And is that perhaps actually one of the things that's rather appealing about them?
They're a strange bunch. It is very appealing. And I would say that I'll do like a folk guitar band led
Mm.
by a female singer. The five female strong last dinner party are even more musically interesting and rich than English Teacher. And that's what
Yes.
makes them straight away more interesting in, say, Dry Cleaning or
Yep.
Sprints or a few other
Yep.
scratchy guitar bands that have their
Mm.
moments, like Baritalia, but musically are a bit like a little bit like eating muesli without any milk. And the last dinner party are like eating muesli with dollops of honey and cream and chocolate and raspberry to the point where you can't even find where the muesli is. It's so rich and fruity, and so it's a much more heady musical sensation by five women who
That
usually
sounds more
dress
like
in
a
long.
Florentine, I think, Graham.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they usually dress in long, floaty white
Yes.
dresses. They're full of life and effervescent energy. And the album itself repeats their live performance in a very, very strong sonic fashion. And as you said, with elements of mid 1970s Queen and ABBA, a bit of Sparks, little bits of minor bits of Kate Bush, bits of orchestration, bits of grand piano, bits of choral work and harmonies, but fundamentally a good old fashioned mid 70s strong rock pop band, but with lyrics that only a 21st century woman could write. A man couldn't have written this album. It's a very feminine album,
Mm.
which is great. Not knocking it. And it's also they're an interesting bunch because the album is called Prelude to Ecstasy. Prelude to Ecstasy. Now that sounds a bit like Steely Dan's 1973 album, Countdown to Ecstasy. And you might think, well, there's no way this young group of women from London who only formed in 2021, i.e., just over 2 years ago. There's no way they know about Steely Dan. That's well before their time. But they
Mm.
do actually say themselves they're influenced by David Bowie and Kate Bush. So perhaps they do actually know there's a link between Ecstasy and Countdown to Ecstasy. I don't know, but it's worth a guess.
And I mean, that's ambitious targeting to be up there with David Bowie and Kate Bush, the male and female most influential musicians of the last 50 years in British pop and rock music. Incidentally, the last dinner party are playing Leeds next Sunday, Graham,
Mm,
at the Leeds Brudenell Social Club, which is one of those ones that presumably before all the furore really happening had already been booked. That's sold out, of course. And then they're coming back
mm.
to Leeds O2 Academy, and that is going to be in September. 24th of September. So a couple of gigs actually for the last dinner party. You may have to go a single last dinner party and just have a dinner party instead for Leeds Brudenell Social. But obviously, there's still time to get tickets for the O2 Academy gig on the 24th of September. Also, I guess, Graham, they produced arguably, I mean, Wet Leg probably had the most memorable single of 2022. And I think it's fair to say that Last Dinner Party's song, I won't, of course, mention the, well, it sounds rather prudish to refer to the rude word that's in the amazingly catchy chorus.
Yeah.
But they're actually, I mean, that's one of the things that
then I
straight
will
away
fuck
caught
you
attention.
like nothing matters. Yeah, that's what it is. Then I will fuck you like nothing matters. It's the main line of chorus. Well,
fudge you, Graham. Fudge you. I will fudge you. Yeah.
But I will fudge the issue. But yeah, well, it sort of sits. The lyrics sit easily with the cover because it's a very grandiose album sleeve. They're all dressed like they're in a Victorian bordello or something from that drama on TV years ago called Tipping the Velvet. All in like corsets and basques and all looking a little bit pre-Raphaelite really. So it's all very romantic and very heady.
So that could be a 1970s album sleeve, couldn't it? Early 70s album sleeve.
It could actually, yeah. I think this is why they've had a bit of a backlash in some sectors of the music press about their almost instant rise to fame. Because I think that they are so feminine and so fearlessly unembarrassed about being a bit baroque and a bit prog and very feminine. They're not trying to tick any cool boxes like that. They're not like trying to fit any genres that are already popular or that are already cool. They're just fearlessly going out there in giving it big. And I think that's got them on Island Records, and it got them playing with the Rolling Stones, and it got them the Brit Award. But it's also got them some people. You know how cool the music press is. They always want to look like they're cool. So they've been accused of being industry plants, like they've been like developed by Island Records in an industry hothouse, or put together like a K-pop band. And I think that's just sour grapes because the music industry's always had an element of manufacture, even amongst some of the world's most critical acclaimed groups. There's still industry involved, and also
the Monkees industry.
Yeah, but beyond that, most famous albums have musicians from other bands playing.
Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Frankie Goes to Hollywood.
Yeah. No one said that Frankie Goes to Hollywood were a manufactured band, but if you saw them playing live, it was very different to the Trevor Horn produced experience.
Well, I'm not going to risk libel. But when I went to see Frankie Goes to Hollywood, the rumor goes that there were, shall we say, additional musicians off stage supplementing the sound. Would that be the polite way of putting it? Now, as I say, I am not seeking to be in any way sued or whatever. I have no proof of this, but it was the talk of the gig on the night that this was the case. I merely mentioned that. And as I say, I am not seeking any challenge legally to that situation because I merely watched a band performing on stage. I have absolutely no idea about this rumor that there were further musicians elsewhere, and I wish not to comment on it. But that sense of being manufactured that used to get thrown at them.
You've certainly covered your bottom there, Charles.
I have tried, Graham, desperately, because I'm aware that what I'm suggesting has a foundation of risk in it. But there's a certain element of when actually something seems to have arrived in such a complete and satisfying form, people tend to think, oh, there must be something behind it that's not just them. There must be someone that's come up with this. The Svengali character, the Malcolm McLaren character that leads to some way of being with a band like Bow Wow Wow, for example, let alone the Sex Pistols, that somehow a Svengali has been involved and achieved what's been achieved. Yet actually, by the sounds of this, I think this has been really well thought out by the musicians involved. The look, the album sleeve, the very arresting, very memorable first single, both lyrically and musically. These are things that have come, it seems to me, from the band themselves by looking, if you like, at the history of music and how to make an instant impact. And yes, you can say that can be done in ways that's manufactured. The obvious example when it comes to girl groups would be Spice Girls. But this is not the comparison that you can make with the Spice Girls. That was deliberately manufactured. That was put together.
They're a proper group. I mean, I looked at the sleeve notes to the album, and three of the songs have a minor co-write from what seems to be the engineer of the album, Jimmy Robertson. Yeah. But every other song is purely the band themselves. All the instruments, i.e. the guitars and bass and drums and vocals, are all the band themselves. I don't think they're a manufactured band, and I think it's a really good album. But I can see why they've had some flack. And I'm also not entirely convinced that doing what they're doing is going to end up with them being a huge band, because Wet Leg, whilst being very poppy, dress in a very sort of down to earth
Yes.
fashion, you know, feminine but not too feminine, a bit
Yeah.
indie looking but not too indie looking. But if you think about it, basically, the Last Dinner Party looked like Bat for Lashes, but sound like Queen. That alone as a phrase is not the sort of description of something which sells lots of records in Britain.
So as a
or
marketing
becomes a huge band.
pitch, that ain't going to work.
Well, it might do, and I certainly hope it does. But there's also an element of the darkness about them, and I don't mean darkness as in like, you know, shadow and shade in brooding clouds, but the band, The Darkness, who were a very 70s hard rock band, but very, very fruity, very melodramatic, who were instantly successful because they're a bit like eating, you know, a really great slice of cake. You love it straight away. But The Darkness, because they were so fruity and they were so flamboyant, and they didn't have Freddie Mercury as lead singer in the Last Dinner Party, they quite quickly got regarded by the general world and the media world and the world of critics as a bit of a joke. So I'm slightly worried the Last Dinner Party, by being so pre-Raphaelite and by being so instantly likable, because the songs are strong songs with strong melodies, may end up accidentally in the same camp. I hope they don't. But I also remember the Klaxons won the Mercury Prize in the noughties, and they were also instantly likable, a bit over the top, musically flamboyant, and they went from being heroes to zeros quite quickly. So I'm hoping the Last Dinner Party avoid that pitfall. I admire
what usually comes after the last dinner,
Graham?
What usually comes after the last dinner party in life?
Going to bed.
Okay, so that's the next album, Going to Bed. Now, that's not particularly a strong prospect, I think.
Now you tell me,
album.
Charles, what comes next?
Snoring loudly on the sofa these days, I think, Graham. That's what comes next these days.
Anyway,
I mean, that's an interesting. That isn't a. You can see that risk. You can see that risk, absolutely. And with The Darkness, actually, is a very good call, because although they had the big Christmas hit single, there was a sense that One Trick Pony to some extent, and that it could never be repeated. And sometimes, I mean, I'd even say Meatloaf, although some people might say that's, you know, but Meatloaf had one great album, and that was so out there, so distinctive.
Yeah, but that was male melodramatics, and it was very masculine. I mean, Meatloaf, although he was extremely over the top, was a very, very macho type bloke.
Yeah,
The Darkness weren't macho, and and the Last Dinner Party certainly aren't macho. So
no, they're not. Good, fair point, Graham. I withdraw the Meatloaf comparison. That's a slice for another day. Now, Graham, I haven't seen this film, but I am very curious about this film called Zone of Interest. Now, this is a film about Auschwitz, and of course, at the moment we are in very sensitive times over anti-Semitic issues. Here's a film by Jonathan Glazer, not Zone of Interest, and you're saying it's only part of a new wave of provocative directors working in the new cinema of satirical super realism.
I just made that, by the way. No one else has written about satirical super realism. I've made that phrase up to describe.
It's a winner, Graham. I think it's like the artistic pitch that you came up with to describe The Last Dinner Party, the comparisons you made there. What, by the way, I think we should actually ask, first of all, what is satirical super realism?
Well, what you have is something that looks real in the first place and deals with real subjects and real topics of either current or historical nature and interest. But although it looks real, the photography and the way it's directed is almost like heightened reality. It's like really colourful and really clear and really in your face. It's not like there's not lots of shadows and lots of shade or darkness. It's like bright, it's right in your face. And that applies to directors. Jonathan Glazer in particular also applies to Ruben Östlund, who made Triangle of Sadness and Force Majeure. It sort of applies to the great director Yorgos Lanthimos, who made Poor Things and The Favourite and Lobster. And it sort of applies to Peter Strickland, the British director who made Flex Gourmet. Quite a lot of Ben Wheatley's works like that.
Yeah.
And the whole bunch of them, what links them apart from the the direction, the look. And the superrealism comes not just from the way it's right in your face and it's bright and it's colourful and it's real, but over the top real. It's also slightly hallucinatory. There's also something slightly offbeat about its reality visually, which marries well with the story, because those directors specialize in stories which appear to be about real things, but actually when you think about it afterwards, they're semi-satirical, and also they're not totally believable, because you think about the story logically, it doesn't quite stack up. The films are there to make a point.
Yeah.
They're not there to just describe reality. And Zone of Interest is probably the peak of all these films, because it deals with one of the world's most horrific and rightly sensitive subjects you could possibly deal with. And it manages to approach the terrible, terrible Holocaust and Auschwitz in that style of satirical surrealism, but without in any way being disrespectful to the subject or to real people or real history. It's not an easy film to watch. It's a horror movie where you never see the horror, but you know the horror's there. And it's an uncomfortable watch, but it's an absolutely brilliant film.
Where does the satire feed into it, in that it's such a painful subject? It's the lowest in the 20th century. There's you cannot think of anything more degrading of humanity than what was committed in that Holocaust at Auschwitz. So how can you bring a satirical edge to such a story?
Well, if you were going to describe it in one line, in a very flippant and insensitive manner, the film by Jonathan Glazer is based partly on Martin Amis's book, but also he read the story of the real camp commandant at Auschwitz, who lived in a nice big house just beyond the camp wall with his family, whilst all this horrific stuff was happening that he was in charge of. You could describe it as the everyday story of a well-organized, ambitious man who just happened to be killing hundreds of thousands of people for no reason whatsoever, except a reason beyond any logic whatsoever. And that's what it is. So they try and live an ordinary life. They're well organized. They've got good middle class values. They're very tidy. He's very hardworking. He takes his job very seriously. You can see where I'm going just by seeing this already. It's already bizarre. And all you've got his wife sitting around with their families having coffee and cake in their house. But then they're talking about clothes and getting their hands on nice fur coats. And without them actually saying that these fur coats and clothes are from the victims just over the wall in the camp, that's what they're talking about. And the scenes portrayed realistically like a small group of WI members talking about fashion. But they're not. They're talking about people who've been killed just across the wall. And the whole film plays like that. The whole film doesn't tell you what to think. It doesn't describe, it doesn't lead you on to a conclusion. It simply portrays the family the way they themselves would have seen themselves. But their behavior, and they don't even seem to be totally aware of it, their behavior is utterly evil and utterly incomprehensible. And he lets the audience work that out for themselves. So it's an incredible film.
That title, Zone of Interest, I mean, you mentioned Martin Amis. Was that a Martin Amis title that he's just used, or did he come up with this
in my research,
himself?
I did not bother to read. In my research, I did not bother to read the book, mainly because it's only loosely based on the Martin Amis book. It's more based on the real story of, I think he was called Hoss, who was the commandant of the camp at Auschwitz, who was later hung in 1947 after the war. Deservedly so, obviously. And supposedly Jonathan Glazer went to a great deal of trouble to portray the house and their garden and their family and how they behaved in the way that actually happened from historical record, as opposed to like creating a drama and squeezing in some historical facts. He's played it straight. He's taken how they behaved like it was normal, but by showing you how they behaved, you can see it's very, very far from being normal. It's an amazingly successful approach, and it also puts you on the spot because as an audience member, because the commandant, apart from his evil ways, is a hardworking chap. He's always striving to be the best boss he can possibly be.
Yeah.
And you find yourself against your own better instincts, almost rooting for him to get promoted. It's like, he's working so hard, he's going to get promotion with the boss, but the boss turns out to be Hitler. So it makes you complicit in the events. It makes you realize that these weren't people unlike you and me. They just happened to be in a different set of circumstances, in a different time in history, with different leaders. It shows you that people's bad behavior is innately human. It's not like some, one-off aberration that could never happen again. This could happen again at any point at the wrong time, in the wrong place. Without telling you that, none of the lines I'm saying ever appear in the film. The film doesn't tell you anything. That's why it's so good.
You've been listening to the podcast Two Big Egos in a Small Car. Your hosts were Graham Chalmers and Charles Hutchinson. This was a Baltic sub-production.